My name is Michael Neumann, and I'm a World War II member of the United States Coast Guard and served in the South Pacific Ocean.
Okay. And what did you do as a Coast Guard?
I was in the engineering division, which is called Division M, and we maintained the steam turbines that operated our ship, and we also maintained all the other mechanical equipment that needed to be taken care of. And on our landing craft that we used for bringing the troops ashore, we would have one of us on each landing craft to make sure they didn't have trouble with the diesel engine. If they did, we would attempt to repair it.
What did your workload involve?
My workload on the ship involved working watch time in the engine room. You'd work every day, 4 hours on, 8 hours off, then 4 on and 8 off. And then when we're at anchor, you would have a different watch. They would put you on a full day watch because you're not underway and you don't need as many people working in the engine room to keep everything running smoothly. And then when we're loading or unloading troops or personnel from the ship, then we're assigned to be one of the crewmen on a LCVP, which is the landing craft that I was with, and that has a single diesel engine in it and some other mechanical equipment, and it would be our job to make sure that it continued operating properly.
Drafted or enlisted?
I was enlisted.
And can you tell us something about life on the ship?
Life on the ship wasn't too bad. The only thing is you're confined to the ship, and you're not there for a week or a month or any. You're there for like over a year on the same ship. And with a ship the size of what I was on, there were other things that you could do when you were off duty, when you weren't working on it. And they would have movies that show, and then you could, they had a chaplain on board, so they would have services every Sunday. And the chaplain happened to be a Catholic chaplain, but he did a Jewish service, a Protestant service, and a Catholic service. So he did 3 services every week. And so that gave you an out to go to somebody to talk to if you had problems or homesick and whatever it would be. But other than that, you just did the jobs you were assigned to, which was a daily routine.
And how are your living arrangements?
Oh, wow. Yeah. The living arrangements were not the best. We had, being an enlisted man, regardless of what rating you were, you just had a big area, and you had these bunk beds that hung on chains that would come down from the bulkheads, which are the walls, and you were assigned to it, and that was yours. And then you had a little compartment where you could keep some of your goods and your toiletries and personal objects and things like that. And you were responsible to clean your pad, which is like a sheet that goes over it. And then if it needs cleaning, there's a laundry where you would bring your clothes to the laundry and they would launder them for you. Nothing was ironed or pressed. It was just cleaned. But you slept on these, and as you can imagine, back then there was no air conditioning. And in the South Pacific it was rather warm. Florida's cool compared to it. And but they did have big blowers that would blow air in from topside down into all the areas where the crews slept. Okay. But the troops that were carried they got some air, but it wasn't very much, so it was quite difficult for any of the troops, either Marines or Army people, to sleep, especially during the day, if they had to sleep during the daytime, because it was so hot. But at night, the air cooled down a bit, so you got a little cooler air coming into your areas.
And did you ever get seasick?
No,
No.
never. Many people did, especially the troops would get seasick because they were down in the hold, and down there where they slept, they still had some kind of bunks, but they also had machinery down there like Jeeps and small trucks and all that stuff. So you had fumes from those, but they had big blowers that are supposed to keep circulating the air. So a lot of times at night, if I worked the watch, they call it, from 8 to 12, 8 p.m. to midnight, I'd come up at 12 o'clock and I'd go outside and sit out there to get some air. This is when we're traveling. And then you'd see a door where the Marine's peeking out, you know, and he's almost sick and he's so hot. And it was illegal, but I did it and others did it. If the master at arms, which would be like the policeman, you know, who's assigned to check everything, wasn't around, we would sneak him into one of the landing craft so they could get in there and be out in the air and sleep and no one would know they're there, as long as they get out without being caught. And it worked out pretty good for especially the guys that were having a hard time.
What were the consequences if you got caught?
Well, I don't know. I never got caught.
What kind of problems did you see on the ship?
Well, it wasn't drugs, because we didn't do drugs back then. The drugs didn't come to Vietnam. And so there weren't drugs. The only problems would be that a couple of guys kind of went a little off their rocker from being out at sea so long, and you know, they had to get some treatment from a psychiatrist. And we did have on, I think, 5 or 6 Navy doctors. We didn't provide Coast Guard doctors. But the Navy owned the ship, anyhow. It was a Navy ship that we operated. So they did provide some personnel, like some doctors. And they had a pretty good sick bay, which would be where you go if you got a problem. And that was, they always treated you and took care of your problems as good as they could. But other than that, you couldn't get off. You couldn't go anyplace. So.
And how did you feel leaving your family?
I didn't mind at all. I wasn't married. I was just out of high school. And I think 80% of us, guys especially, couldn't wait to get out of school to join the service because we wanted to defend our country. We all felt that way. A lot of them lied about their ages. Some quit school just to go, you know, so it didn't bother you leaving. It was an honor. We all, no matter who you were, you felt, gee, I'm so lucky I made it. Like when I went in the Coast Guard, I was so worried when I went to boot camp. They put you through a very strict physical. And I kept worrying, I hope I don't fail it. I hope I don't fail it. Where other guys, you know, if they're conscientious objectors or something like that, they would try to figure out ways not to go in, you know. So they might claim they got a flat foot or they got a crooked eye or something. But that was very few between. There weren't many of them like that.
And you said that you rescued prisoners of war. Could you tell us more about that?
Well, we didn't really we rescued them, but they had already been rescued. They were rescued when the Japanese stopped fighting. Then they opened them up and released them. So none of the troops that we had to go in with guns and fight the Japanese to get the prisoners back. They were just there putting it in time until someone like we could come along and pick them up and take them out of there. So we did rescue them from there, and some of them were in pretty bad shape, and some of them were wounded pretty bad because the Japanese did not take care of them. They didn't take care of their own, let alone anybody else.
And could you explain how your boats approached the beach?
How did our boat approach the beach? Mm-hmm. Well, the big ship, the one I went, like the Cambria, the APA, That only can go close enough where there's enough water for it, because it's a large ship and it draws quite a bit of water. So you have to stay out a ways. And just before you get in there, then you anchor. There'll be Navy battleships and cruisers out, and they will be firing their long-range guns in over everything onto the land to try and beat back some of the enemy so they get away. So we get in as far as we could safely and anchor. And then the only problem you would have would be with mostly is the Japanese Zeros, which are their suicide planes. They would come fighting out and at you. So they kept the gun crews handy on them, not even at Nagasaki, but all the time, because they were out there looking to get the kind of ships we had, because they knew we were bringing in troops that were going to conquer them.
And how did you feel about the Japanese? Did you have any hatred for them?
You didn't really have hatred. It wasn't hatred. It was some other feeling. It was that they were not real. I mean, they didn't seem to be like a normal human being would be. Like, as an example, when a Japanese guy was shot, which is what the Marines told me when we brought him back on the ship, and laying there, one of our medics would go up and see and try to help him. If one of our guys was there and a Japanese soldier was around and our guy was asking for help, he'd just come up and kill him. I mean, they had no feelings for anybody. Their only feelings were to kill as many people as they could kill for their empire. And I have a picture here that I can show you after of one of our prisoners, an American, and they have him kneeling down, and the guy's there with a hatchet, or I forget, I'd have to look at the picture again, to just kill him, because they didn't want to bother with him.
And what battles were you involved in?
I really wasn't in the other battles. I was on the ship right at the end of the Okinawa battle, but it wasn't there. We went there, but the invasion was all done, so we just went there and provided some supplies and did some things like that. And then the battles after that were aircraft that might attack us, or mines. The Japanese had put a lot of floating mines around, so we had to keep the seamen that are up there looking out for it. They'd be looking for the mines in the water, which are big iron things that they have floating there. And once we'd see them, we'd have to hold back. Then they'd call the gunners, and the gunners would go to the 20 or 40 millimeter guns, usually the 20s, and fire at them to try and hit the right spot to make them blow up. Then once they blew up the ones, then we'd continue on through. But I was not a gunner. You know, I didn't get to the guns. You all got training in that before you went out, because you might be on another job. But
how long were you at sea?
Pardon me?
How long were you at sea?
August till March.
And what were you doing in Nagasaki?
What was I doing in there? We were occupying it, United States, to take over the province of Nagasaki, which was done, and that was same thing was done with Hiroshima. But I didn't go to Hiroshima. Hiroshima was the first atomic bomb. And then following that, they hadn't surrendered, so they decided to drop the second atomic bomb at Nagasaki. And we also had a whole fleet, which we were part of before we went into Nagasaki, where we were, United States never made an invasion landing on the main country of Japan. It was all the islands and bombing from airplanes and stuff. So it was, they had come up with a plan where we would get 1,000 ships, I don't know how many thousand people and that, and we were going to invade the mainland of Japan at Kyushu. And when the atom bombs got done, it was decided not to do that, and so we got diverted and went up to Nagasaki. Landing that was going to be done. One other reason they canceled it was because we had so many ships and so many people coming in, thousands of them. And our intelligence people had found out that the Japanese had moved most all their artillery and military to the coastline where we were going to land. But we didn't know it at that time. And we found out their objective was, as the ships like mine came in, they were going to, from offshore, just try and sink them all, so that way they would kill everybody and nobody could land. That was the Japanese intent, but it never happened. Thank the Lord for that. Because that would have been catastrophe, the number of United States troops that would have been killed. Yeah.
And can you tell us about the spotters?
Well, I don't know an awful lot about the spotters, except they were up in the mountains and hid in the different islands throughout the Pacific. And they had a radio where they could contact some base, a U.S. military base, and try and give a description of where they saw movements of Japanese troops or ships going. And these spotters were up there for a long, long time. And sometimes they got caught and they naturally got killed. And a lot of the spotters survived, but they had trouble getting the proper foods to eat and other things. And when we left Nagasaki and heading back to the United States, we made a few stops. One of them was in Shanghai, China, because some of the spotters that had got rescued and been brought into Shanghai, and we picked them up there and brought them back with us.
And where did the treaty signing take place?
Well, the treaty, it was on my ship, the Cambria, APA 36. Once we got into Nagasaki, the second day, the Marines rounded up the officials of Nagasaki, the governor, the general who was in charge of all the military activities for Nagasaki, and some other officials, and they brought them all back to our ship. And the officers' wardroom, which is a big dining area where the officers eat, and it's got a big table in it. They seated all the Japanese on one side of the table and the Americans on the other side of the table. And the Americans were represented by the United States Marines, United States Army, United States Navy, United States Coast Guard. All right? They were all there, and they reviewed the terms of the surrender that the headquarters in Tokyo had agreed to do, but the provinces had to agree to it also, which would be Nagasaki was a province, like the state of Florida. They don't have states, they have provinces. So they all sat there, and that was all reviewed with the officials, and once they agreed to it, then they brought them back, got them out of there, took them back on the shore where they lived.
And what were your opinions on the atomic bombs, whether or not they should have been dropped? Or?
Oh, I think it was a great, it's too bad that it had to be done because the Japanese were so stubborn. They refused before any bomb was dropped like that. They were notified and told that something about, I don't know the details of that, but I know that they were told and tried to negotiate them into surrendering before they had to take serious things like dropping an atomic bomb. I don't know if they told them what kind of bomb or what it was, and they did refuse from all the information I received when I was out there. And so that's why they had to go ahead and do it. So it really it killed quite a few Japanese, but the amount it killed was a lot smaller than the amount of Americans and other allies of ours that would have been killed if we ever made that landing invasion in Kyushu.
Did you earn any medals while you were in the Coast Guard?
Well, I got the regular medals that most of the guys got that were out there, but the only special one I got was for the occupation of Nagasaki. I got a special medal for that, which was sent to me by the government. Then I had the other one participating in the war, and then in the Pacific, I had another medal. And there were some other ones that I never got because you had to apply for them. And they were by a couple of our allies, and it was given to the ship, you know. And I don't remember which ones they were, but if you wanted one of them, you had to write to somebody in their embassy and then you could get it. But it wasn't issued by the United States.
And what was it like getting used to military life as opposed to life as a civilian?
Oh, after I went in, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
No problem. Well, I had a little edge on some people. I ended up going to a full-time ROTC high school where you wear uniforms every day, right? And it was run by the Marines. And so I had done all the things that beforehand, you know, like I learned your manual of arms and bayonet doings and shooting 30 caliber rifles and, you know, all that stuff, whoever they were. But and so when I went in, I kind of just got rid of my full-time ROTC uniform and went to the Coast Guard. My parents owned a summer cottage in New Hampshire on the ocean, up near Hampton Beach. And there was a Coast Guard station up there, all right, where they used for spotting subs during the war because there were a lot of submarines, Jap subs or German subs off our coast, rather. And so my buddy that I met up there when we were there in the summer on vacation, he and I used to go up to the Coast Guard station and hang around there a lot. So then when it came time for us to join the services, we both said, well, we're going to join the Coast Guard. And when they ask us where to go, we're going to tell them Hampton Beach, New Hampshire. Then we can still be here and be with the family. You don't even get a chance to think about that. That's for people that have been in for 25 years or so, and they get special duty on shore in those places. So that's really one of the reasons we went in the Coast Guard. Other than that, it would have been the Navy. You know.
And what was it like coming home from war?
Kind of exciting. When I came back to the States the first time, which was when we were out the longest, I told you we came back in, then we did a little work on the ship in California, then we went on the Magic Carpet Run, which brought us back into the Pacific and go to all the islands and pick up troops that were still there from prior to the war ending. And so when we came back, a lot of us went looking for a grocery store so we could buy a bottle of regular milk. And we buy a bottle of milk and we just stood there and drank the whole thing down because you don't have any regular milk, you have powdered milk. It's awful. Powdered milk, that was one of the bad things on the, other than that, the food was good on the ship because of the size of the ship and the number of troops, we had big walk-in freezers, so they really stocked up a lot of food in there. But you couldn't stock up milk in the freezers. And the ice cream we got every day, they made it from the powdered ice cream or whatever it was, but that tasted okay. And I drank coffee when I was a senior in high school. And so, and I always had cream in it. And the first cup of coffee I took after we left the States on the ship had the powdered milk. I almost got sick. So I never touched it again. I'm still drinking the coffee black. And how many years has that been?
Can you tell us more about the Magic Carpet Run?
Well, there isn't. It wasn't anything to do with fighting. It was strictly to go back to all the islands. There's got a whole list of islands from Okinawa to Saipan to Guam to Tinian down to the Philippines, all those places until you were told which ones to go to. You didn't decide on your own because they say some ships to some and some to the other. But we went back to the same area where we were during the war, which is all that whole area down in there. We went back there and made trips around and just kept picking up troops until we had a full load of troops. And that would be our second trip over there. But we were out there quite a while because it takes you time to get there and get them done and check everybody that's going to get on and who they are and where they're going and how sick are they and do they need to go to sick bay or do they need a hospital ship? You know, because the Navy had hospital ships too, that people that were really bad could be put on the hospital ships. So you collect them all. Then we came back, we came into, it was kind of, that was an enjoyable trip, really, because it was almost like a cruise. You know, you didn't have to worry, be out there at night, you couldn't have a cigarette. No. During the war, you had to stay inside. If you smoked, you had to stay inside, but they allowed it. Because during the day you could, but once it got dusk, you couldn't, because the enemy ships could see your cigarette from miles away. They picked up the red flame or the ash from them and stuff like that. So, but then we didn't have to do that anymore because there was no enemy looking for us. So we could live more of a normal life, so to put it. We still had to work the same many hours and all that stuff, but we're used to that. 4 on and 8 off, 4 on, 8 off. Then once in a while you could request to get it shifted to a different 4. You know, depend when you want to get off. If you want to get done, finish a 4-hour watch when they're going to, at the time they're going to show a movie, so you can show a movie, then you can switch your watch around so you can go to the movie on your 8 hours off. And the same thing with breakfast. If you take the 4 to 8 in the morning watch, then you can go to breakfast. Otherwise you miss it. You know,
and you mentioned that you were a firefighter?
No, I was, they call them firemen, okay? That's just the rating they give it. And I think that goes back to the old days with when the old steamships, they used to have coal, and they had to shovel coal in the boilers to make the steam, to run the steam engines and all that stuff. And that's where so they called them firemen. So they made anybody in engineering, they used that term or that rating as fireman, okay? But if you went up higher, then it got changed to some other specialty, you know. So you started a fireman 2nd class, and you went to fireman 1st class. Then if you went beyond that, I would have had to stay longer in the service, you know, because you'd have to be in for a longer period of time. And the firemen on our ship didn't have it that bad because they were all oil-fired boilers. So what they do is they have these big burners. The boilers are gigantic things, go up to the ceiling here. They have them in the furnace, and they just take these big things. I never did it. It wasn't my job. But I could watch them. I watched them do it, though. And they shove them, take one out, shut the oil off, there's nozzles, turn it off, take the other one out, and there's another one ready. They shove in, turn it on, and the other ones just relight that one then. So they keep the burners going all the time in there to keep the steam up. And this, I had you spell where I was from, Schenectady. And the thing that kind of impressed me when I first got on the ship, and I went down in the engine room, the steam turbines were made in Schenectady, at the GE plant in Schenectady. They had the biggest steam turbine plant in the country. Yeah, there.
What do you think people should most remember about World War II?
That's hard to say. You mean people my age? Because if they're much younger than me, they aren't around anymore. Really, they're not. They're not around anymore. I thought World War II was a necessity, and it had to be because we were attacked, and they were going to slaughter us if we didn't get going. And it was a war we had to fight over there so they wouldn't come over here to keep. They went to our islands, and they took over all the islands and almost mutilated Hawaii. That's how it started on December 7th. So I think it was a necessary war, and I think we did the best we could do, and we just thank God that we won it. Because if we didn't, it wasn't only Japan, it would have been also Hitler in his Gestapo or his bunch that were out to try and take over Europe. And we fought that one too. And that would have been the Atlantic area. You know.
What's the difference between the Coast Guard then and the Coast Guard today?
Oh, the Coast Guard then and the Coast Guard today? Well, one thing is the Coast Guard today is just the Coast Guard. It's not part of the Navy or the Air Force or the Army. It's its own department, all right? It's the Coast Guard. During World War II, it was made part of the Navy, came under the Navy jurisdiction. They had to do that because you couldn't have different admirals trying to run all the stuff that was going on out there in the Pacific. So the Navy controlled it. Where you went, where you fought, how many went, and all that stuff. And so the Coast Guard was given the job to operate the ships that they didn't have enough people to operate. So we had a lot of ships, a lot of Navy ships. We also had about 400 U.S. Army ships. They couldn't operate, so the Coast Guard ran those out there too. But today's Coast Guard, it changes as time changes. Today it's mostly like home defense and drug interdiction and immigration, plus people in their regular boats, try to keep them safe, teach them how to operate safely, and also they're responsible for port security. Every port where commercial boating is, the Coast Guard's responsible for that, to make sure the ships that come in there are inspected and are legal and are safe to use. More so with ours than the foreign ones, but the foreign ones still have to meet certain requirements. So, and that's in itself is a big job with all the shipping that's going on.
And did you have pictures you wanted to show us?
Yeah, the USS Cambria. It's an APA, Auxiliary Personnel Attack Ship. It's used for invasions. It was part of the Amphibious division. And there were 10 of these APAs that were used in the Pacific that were Coast Guard ones. There are other APAs that were operated by the Navy as well. And we carried 1,200 troops, and we had a crew of 600 people. The ship was 500 feet long. That's within a few feet, rounded out. And it had 5-inch turrets on the bow and the stern, front and back. And then it had 40-millimeter turrets and about 15, I think, 20-millimeter turrets, which were mostly used for enemy aircraft, like the Japanese suicide planes and stuff like that, because they were the most damaging thing that would run into unless a sub got you. We also had depth charges for submarines. We had smoke machines on the back of it where they burn those and it just makes big black smoke coming out to hide you. And that was very efficient because we used that quite a bit. This is a picture of the landing craft that we had most of this size, and then we had some bigger ones. This was an LCVP, vehicle and personnel. A vehicle could be a small Jeep or something like that. But it's usually used for personnel. And they would be lowered off the side of the ship you were just looking at, the APA. They had them hanging on davits on the side, both sides, port and starboard. And when we're going to make a landing, they'd all be lowered into the water. The troops would be all up on deck, ready to go with their gear. And then they would form a circle, and they would just be a big circle from the ship out and then come in and spaced so that the one could come in, stop, and the troops could climb down the rope ladders they had, get in, and then that would pull out and head in towards the beach or wait for the others, depending however they were going to do it. And then they just continued doing that till they got them off. That's what these were used for. This is the picture in the Cambria wardroom. The second day, well, we anchored the first day in Nagasaki, started unloading troops, and the second day we continued unloading, and some of the first troops and officials went in, and they rounded up the Japanese people that were operating the province of Nagasaki, and they seated all them on one side of the table, as you can see, and the other side were American officers. And at that table, they reviewed the terms of the agreement for surrender. And this had to be done with each province in Japan, even though the head of Tokyo was saying, we're going to surrender. Then those terms had to be sent out to the different provinces, and then the United States would review them with the Japanese people that were in charge. Like on this table, on the one table on the end is Lieutenant General Takeuchi, who's the commanding general of all the Japanese forces in Nagasaki. The next one was the governor of Nagasaki, Governor Nagawaki. I may not pronounce it right. And then the rest of the people on that side of the table were staff officers and officials of the province of Nagasaki. On our side of the table, the U.S. side of the table, was Brigadier General John Walker, Chief of Staff to U.S. Marines, and then Commodore Knowles, who was the Navy Commodore for the whole group of boats. They're like flotillas. And the Cambria happened to be the flagship of this flotilla. So all the boats came under, the other APAs and ships came under the jurisdiction of, excuse me, the Navy, Commodore Knowles. And then underneath that was the Army, Navy, and Coast Guard officials on the other side of the table. This shows the landing craft, the LCVPs that I talked about, as they come up alongside the APB, and the troops climb down into it and then they pull off. This is one that's just filled up and he's ready to leave. Well, I told you about the Navy. The ships were owned by the Navy, right? I think I mentioned that before, right? Mm-hmm. And the Navy, then the Coast Guard commander was, commandant was asked to, told what kind of troops, what kind of ships and so forth that he needed. And I told you probably the number of ships that they had, of APAs. Also, a lot of pictures you've seen, like of Normandy invasion, and that's the bigger ships that are not as big as the Cambria. They're a different ship. They go up to the beach, and they have doors that open in the front, and they have tanks and everything in them. Those are called LSTs. So there's nothing else I think I want to add, unless there's some other questions you wanted to ask. And
I think we're done.
okay. Pack up. All right.
It was nice meeting you.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you too. All of you. What time are you supposed to get out?
Whatever
oh, you don't? Oh, yeah. Supper time.